You are listening to And If Love Remains, a unique show spotlighting people, ideas, science, culture, and art. Your host, Mike Leavitt.
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, my name is Mike Leavitt, and I am your host, and I am here with my co-host, Dr. Elias Axel Pettersson. Welcome to the show, Elias, again.
Hey, Mike. Good to be back. This is going to be a fun day.
This is going to be a fun day, and it's going to be especially fun for me because I have you on, but I also have my son, Stephen, on. And we've done a couple, you and I, usually we talk music, but we've done a couple of episodes on your one of your other passions, which is chess, which was really fascinating and fun to kind of delve into, me as a complete amateur. But somebody who I know loves chess and really enjoys playing is my son, Stephen. And he's played you a few games, and that was a lot of fun to watch him kind of think through and at one point, I think the first game he's talked about you wrecking him. But anyway, so it kind of came to mind that maybe. So first of all, Stephen, welcome to the show. You're on the show today also.
Thank you. It's nice to be recognized here now that I'm here.
No, we're not talking about you in absentia. But we so they played a few games. They played a few games earlier, and then I think had a pretty good time, and we thought maybe it might be a fun podcast to get together and do it again. So they played a few games just before the podcast, and I thought it would be great if you guys want to talk through some of these games and your thinking and I just kind of open forum, kind of an discussion on what happened, what and some strategies involved and things like that. So both of you, welcome to the show. Glad to have you on. And If Love Remains.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, awesome. Stephen, great we've played a little bit now and it's been a lot of fun. So it's been cool. I look forward to going over some games with you and talking some strategy and planning and stuff like that. So
thank you. Yeah, this is going to be fun. And I mean, the outcome was pretty clear from the beginning, but I mean, I had a lot of fun playing, and I think I have a lot of things that I can learn from, so I'm excited to get into it.
I can learn a lot too, and actually one of the games, spoiler alert, you did very well in one of the games, so this is going to be cool. I thought maybe we'd start off, since you and I are pretty familiar with playing. I mean, your rating says that you're a beginner, but you're actually not a beginner. You're a pretty strong player. And maybe just kind of talk about what we did and going over notation so that people that are listening and not maybe seeing a board in front of them could maybe set it up and kind of know.
One other thing before we just one more preliminary thing, because you mentioned something about rating. So let's talk about what we talked about in an earlier podcast, but just quickly, what is the rating? What does that mean? And like if somebody's a certain rating and playing another person a certain rating, how does that handicap each other?
Sure. Oh, I don't know if it's a handicap per se, in terms of like
I
a
guess
golf.
Maybe more like what are the odds of somebody winning?
Yeah. Or what knowledge can you get from seeing that number? So the rating is different from a ranking, and I think a lot of people, when they talk to me about chess, and probably with you, Stephen, they're like, well, how good are you? What number are you in the state or in the country? I'm like, well, I don't know what rank I am, but I know I have a number that tells me approximately what my strength is compared to other millions of other players that have a number. And so the general range for humans is between 0 and about 2,900. The world champion right now, Magnus Carlsen, is right below 2,900. Computers can play higher than that, of course. And so, if you're like a beginner, you might be in the 3 to 500 range, kids that just are starting to learn how to play and move the pieces and things like that. Once you get up into the 800-900s, 1,000, you can play some things. You can understand a little bit of some concepts and some tactics and strategies. And, the higher your rating goes, the higher your number gets. the better you are. So every 100 points you gain is sort of another deviation. So you're, more likely, let's say a 1,000 player versus a 900 player should win like 3 out of 4 of those games. So if you're rated, 3, 4, 500 points higher, it's 99% chance that you'll win a game, something like that. So they're not quite indicative, and that's why I said earlier that Stephen's rating on here. Can we share our ratings, Stephen?
Yeah.
Yeah, his is around 1,000 or just a little less, but he plays at a higher level than that. So the rating is not very indicative of his strength. So when I see that number, I think it's a fairly weak player compared to my rating. I'm for blitz, and there are different ratings you can have. Blitz is like a 5-minute game. Standard would be a longer game, like 15 minutes plus per side, and then lightning would be maybe 1 minute per game per side. So my blitz rating is in the 2200s. I think my peak is around 2300. So I'm rated 13 or 1400 points higher, but he was playing at a much higher level than his rating would indicate. So that's a preliminary kind of discussion. Does that sort of make some sense?
Yeah, it does to me.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and then I also play a lot. So my peak rating, at least in Lightning, is like 12. I think I hit 1,300 at one point, but it's around 11, 1,200. So that's my peak out there. But because I've been on a kind of a down streak, it's been because the rating, at least on this website on chess.com, fluctuates. So there's that as well.
That makes more sense. The 12, 1,300. You're probably, you might even be stronger than that in these blitz games. But we can talk about how you could gain a few hundred points by just a couple little tweaks here and there. But you're playing very well. So should we just I don't know, any other preliminary thoughts?
Do you guys want to start with the
before
first game that you guys did today?
Yeah, let's.
No, I think that kind of sets us up. So that you played 4 games today?
I think 4 or 5 games. Yeah.
Okay, so
we can do that.
Yeah, let's start with the first game, and Stephen. Yeah, what? So who was playing white? Who was playing black on that first game, and what were you guys thinking?
Yeah, I think I was white. So, but what we could do also is we're going to talk about the games. Obviously, this is not a visual format, so we might spout out some numbers and letters and things like that. So for people following at home, the chessboard is 64 squares. It's 8 by 8. So if we say a letter, the bottom 8 rows, if you will, or the columns, I should say, are letters, A through H. And then as you go up, looking from the white perspective to the black perspective, it goes 1 through 8. So we might say something like E4, which in the old system, for those that played chess a long time ago or read some old books, would be king pawn to king pawn 4. But I use the newer system. I think Stephen's used to the newer system called algebraic notation. So we might just spout out some things. It sounds like weird chess lingo, but if you want to pause a video or video podcast, or just listen slowly to it, we can go over the moves, and you can set it up on a board at home if you'd like.
And the cool thing about that is you could literally take this podcast and go and recreate those games, and
you could.
Which is kind of fun. And I know famous games that have been recreated, and you can kind of get in the mind of what they were thinking. So this is a really useful tool for people.
Yeah. So let's start out. Okay. Maybe Stephen, you can walk me through. You were black, but you've probably played this opening before, and I'm going to turn off my evaluation lines because I think it's helpful when we're going over games, even when I go over my own games, not to look at the computer suggestion, because it's so easy just to look at that and say, oh, well, I should have just done this, but I don't really understand what Stockfish understands. It's way higher than my understanding level.
Right.
So I want to know what I'm thinking. So anyway, I'll just turn those off. We can turn them on later.
Gotcha. I'm going to have the evaluation, but I don't have the moves right in front of me. So I just have the
that's
evaluation bar on the side, but that's it.
Okay.
So
cool. So let's do it. So you played this what's called the Pert's defense, or Perk by some.
Mm-hmm.
So,
it was kind of an Indian setup.
Yeah.
And kind of my goal with the first game, because I had a pretty good idea of what was going to happen, but I just wanted to kind of make things interesting, and I felt like this was a good kind of setup opening to not blunder in the first 4 moves and kind of give us some kind of an interesting structure to deal with. So,
do you play a lot of Indian setups?
I play them a lot more if I'm playing in Bullet or Lightning. So,
Okay.
like if I have to move fast because they have the short moves and then plans are pretty simple.
Right.
So,
do you want to explain what an Indian setup is to people? I don't know if they know what we're even talking about.
Yeah. Okay. So, I don't know exactly how to explain it perfectly, but I'll do my best.
Okay.
Basically, so one of the first principles in chess is that you need to control the center, and the idea of an Indian setup is that you play very short non-committal pawn moves and try to control the center from a distance in a way that allows things to open up in an advantageous and attacking way. So, for example, rather than playing e4, d4, e5, d5, and controlling the center with pawns, I'll control the diagonal with d6, a shorter pawn move, a one square pawn move instead of a 2 square pawn move, and then open up my bishop the other way with g6 and go bishop g7 and control that diagonal that way and control the center from a distance.
Yeah, you explained it perfectly. I think whenever I teach, beginners, for instance, and I'm sure you went through this similar thing. And when I used to coach at this academy locally, every place they have the same 3 precepts for an opening. And the main thing is controlling the center, like you said. The second principle you want to do is get your pieces out. Of course, there are some nuances to that. How do you get your pieces out? How are they working in harmony? But typically, it's a pretty easy way to get them out at the beginning so that they're at least active. And then get your king safe. So usually that entails castling. Now, again, there are some nuances, some openings. You don't have to castle as early because the setup is very closed. The structure is closed, so you have more time. Other setups are more open and flamboyant, I guess, or active. And so you've got to get safe pretty quickly. And so in this case, what you did is you're controlling from a long range, like an artillery, if you will, instead of the foot soldiers, the swordsmen at the front. And I play both setups. So usually Indian setups are for black, although they're also for white. But there are a few different kinds. There's a King's Indian, there's a Queen's Indian, a Bogo Indian, Nimzo Indian, and there's a Grunfeld defense, which kind of imitates or mimics those setups. So I think they're really good setups in general, and they're, like you say, they're easy to play fast. So yeah, you did that, and then you basically putting the bishop on the longest diagonal to have a long range attack. That's called fianchettoing or fianchettoing the bishop. So you ended up doing that. Good. So you want to walk me through? Our first few moves are pretty standard. No real mistakes or mishaps here.
Yeah. So I was putting the bishop on that longest diagonal like you were talking about, getting my knight out, and then you were just putting your 2 pawns in the center, being super principled as expected. And the move I understand. The first move I understand, but I don't understand. It is like a super mainline opening move. Is H3.
I thought you might catch that. I'm not even sure that's the best.
But, I don't know if it's the best move, but it was a very annoying move.
Yeah, well, that's partly why I did it. And I think we'll go through these moves, and I'm sure if somebody puts it into a computer, they'll see that, hey, we're not, by any means playing perfect moves, and I'm making mistakes as well. Because this is a fast game. We played a 3-2, which is 3 minutes plus a 2-second increment. So every move that you make, you gain 2 seconds. So you'll end up having a little more than 3 minutes for your game, which is still quite fast. I mean, I think most lay people can't finish an entire game of chess in 3 minutes. So let's just go over the moves, and we'll get to that point and see what and why I did that. So for those following along, we have e4, d6, knight c3, g6, knight f3, bishop g7. That's your fianchettoing the bishop on that long diagonal. d4, so I've got the center with 2 pawns versus your 1 pawn. Knight f6, and then I played h3 on move 5. So I think you know why I played that. What were your thoughts when I did play that?
My first thoughts were it it hinders my the first thing it hinders is my bishop going out
Hmm.
because you're controlling that diagonal really well from c8 to h3.
Hmm.
So that's a very well controlled diagonal now. And my next thought is that it also kind of stops my future plans because in at least in the King's Indian setup, the idea is to kind of pawn storm on that side of the board. And
Yeah.
so by playing h3, you stop a lot of my attack down that g file.
Yeah. Although, so you're right on both those. That's why I say your understanding level and playing level is not what your rating would indicate, because that's exactly what I was planning with H3. The only drawback that I see is the old adage that once you move a pawn forward, you can never move it back. So by moving my pawn forward, I've lost a little bit of control over the square that it was controlling before, G3. And I still have a pawn controlling that, but I'm probably going to castle to my king side. I mean, it's faster to castle to the king side than to the queen side. Um, Although in Indian setups, I sometimes do castle to the queen side. But if I do castle to the king side, I've already made a committal pawn move and slightly weakened myself. So maybe if you do that pawn storm, which is basically pushing all the pawns on one side of the board, towards the other enemy king, that could be a liability for me later on instead of a strength. I don't know. I don't think it's too bad in this setup. But the other thought I had was just to do bishop e3 first. And then I was worried about things like knight g4 attacking the bishop, which, I mean, I can move it around to g5 and you do go h6 and I go bishop h4, g5, bishop g3. And, it's fine, but we've both made some committal moves. I just didn't want to go down all those rabbit holes since I haven't studied that a lot. And I didn't know if you had, because you play these setups a lot. So I just, played it safe. And also just another thing, so people can backtrack, because I think already you and I are assuming that people understand what we understand. Why would you even move the bishop to g4 in the first place?
Oh, right. So the idea of moving the bishop to g4 is that it's attacking the knight on f3.
Mm-hmm.
And more than that, it's pinning it to the queen so that if I attack the knight again, it becomes a very difficult piece to move.
Exactly. Yeah. And the knight we're talking about controlling the center, and you're indirectly attacking the center or controlling it more by attacking my knight, because my knight's controlling d4 and e5. So if you were to attack that pawn on d4 and say I don't have any other way to take my knight, I'd either have to sacrifice my structure by taking it with my pawn, so my queen could still protect the d4 pawn, or I'd have to take it with my queen and then lose the d4 pawn potentially. We're talking 3-4 moves in the future. So I'd have to kind of keep an eye on that d4 pawn. And I think this is where beginners sort of lose the thread, is they don't count how many pieces are attacking or defending a certain piece. And it's very easy then to just pick off a pawn and pick off another pawn or something like that. And those become pretty easy tactics for more experienced players to spot. Luckily, you got most of them. There are occasional spots later on where you kind of missed a little tactic here or there, but you understood and guarded against most of those. So, okay, we've spent a long time on 5 moves here already. Mike, how are you doing?
No, I'm excited. This is great.
Okay.
I'm enjoying this thoroughly. Yeah, so keep going. Keep moving.
Okay.
Yeah.
There is one more thing I wanted to talk about with h3 real quick.
Yeah.
Is like, if you let me play, if like an h5, a g5, g4 kind of an idea, then it could become a weakness. But with how early you played it and how back my pieces still are, that becomes pretty difficult for me.
Yeah,
So
and I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how you'd get a g5 in there at this point, because I have my dark squared bishop protecting that. But if you did sort of h6, g5, and then g4, you could. But then you've also already taken a move to do g6, and another opening principle is you don't want to move the same piece twice. And I see a lot of beginners make that mistake. They move a knight or they move a pawn, then they move it again. And, there are some openings where you do attack pieces. And so you're gaining time by moving those pawns. But usually you don't want to move a piece 2, 3, 4 times in an opening. So I think it was pretty safe. I don't know the main lines here. H3 might be a main line. Okay, so you castled again. All your moves are very principled. You're making perfect moves so far. And then okay, let's go. You want to go from here, and you can kind of say some moves.
Yeah, so I castled here, and then you continued with your plan that you were setting up with h3 by playing bishop to e3. And then here, I probably played e5 a little bit too soon. So
I'm not sure about that, but yeah, this was a pretty maybe risky move. But okay, what were you thinking at this place here?
Well, my idea here is the two moves that I saw for you that were going to be really annoying were queen d2 to trade off that bishop that's on that long diagonal that has a lot of prospects, and then the second move, and this is only because I haven't studied it enough but I really don't like this move, is you playing e5 yourself.
Yeah, I thought you might be worried about that. I don't think you have to be worried at this point. So I'll tell you what, I think that my next move is what you said, queen to d2, because I then reserve the option to castle queenside, and I am going to try to plan to trade my bishop for your bishop, because you have such a strong bishop. This is the Indian bishop, the fianchettoed one. My bishop's strong too, but if I can trade that, get my queen to h6 and open up the h file, then I've got an attack on your king, especially since I haven't castled yet. So you're right about that, but you don't have to worry about that. That's pretty mainline stuff. If I were to push e5, I think eventually that pawn is going to get a little bit overextended, and I think you can do some things in the meantime to counteract that. So, I would look at things like knight bd7 or knight c6. I think e5 in the end is not bad. Again, I don't know the theory, but I think you can get the pawn back. It's just after a few moves, you kind of lost the thread. So, yeah, it is pretty committal. At this point, I would be curious what a computer would say, but I would be probably inclined to do like a bit knight. See, if you do knight c6, I could play d5, but then I'm committing and I'm opening up that e5 square, and so I can't really push there anymore. And you can always hit my center with c6 and e6. So maybe a knight c6 is not bad. You could, even in this position, do things like knight a6, which looks weird, but in the King's Indian, this happens sometimes. So knight a6, the idea being that if I take it with my bishop, you do get some bad doubled pawns, but I lose a bishop and you open up the other diagonal. I know it doesn't look pretty, but I've seen King's Indian games with that, and white rarely takes the knight because there's just too much loss of control over the center. And so typically you'll do like knight a6, c7, and then knight back to c7, and you're getting ready to push d5 or e5, and you have a little more central control, but you're kind of from the back lines. So anyway, I think e5 was okay. Let's see if the evaluation goes. Yeah, see, it goes a tiny bit up, but not much. So, I mean, what am I, like maybe plus a half a point or something, or I don't know.
not even the pawn. So
yeah, so it's not bad. So let's see, what do we do? I traded d takes e5, d takes e5, and then I don't know if I want to keep my queen, but anyway, what are you thinking here?
Here I wasn't visualizing really. I wasn't visualizing enough of what was going to happen, and so the board opened up a lot more than I was ready for.
Yeah.
And so that's when the queens came off the board, and then and then you played bishop c4, which
You weren't expecting, maybe.
It's not that I really wasn't expecting it. It's more that it's just a really annoying move
Uh-huh.
because it's most of my ideas for the future involve moving that F pawn in some way by moving the knight that's on F6 either back or into the
Or
center once your
H5 or
knight leaves the
something.
center. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And so, or using it to kind of restructure the position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you do have some outposts on like F4, and if you could put the knight there, and you might even I might even trade it, maybe not, but if that happens, you'd get a pawn kind of forward stuck down my throat a little bit, and it's annoying to deal with. But it also is an advanced pawn. It's a little bit weak. But anyway, that could be a potential move. I think when you said, so just to back up a bit, you said the position opened up. So we did trade a lot of pieces. Now we have some open lines here because the center pawns were traded. But yeah, you don't have any of your queen side pieces out. The bishop, knight, and rook are still stuck. I don't have my king side incredibly developed, but I most of it is. I still have to get my bishop out. So that's what I did. But yeah, just taking these. I thought you might think I was going to take the pawn on e5. So had you planned a contingency for that?
I saw it. Here, wait, let me go back to.
So this would
where
be
you play
move
knight
9
takes
instead of
e5.
bishop c4 if I do knight takes e5.
Right. With that, I saw. Oh wait, hold on. Let me get. With knight takes here. Okay. My plan, I think, here was to just play knight h5 and
Okay.
kind of hit both knights. And so if I play knight h5, and let's just assume for a second you don't hang your knight.
Yeah.
And,
All right. We have to
play
assume
knight
best
there.
moves from the other. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's hard because a lot of, again, when I have a couple chess students and then I'll pose them a question like, why is this not a good move? They're like, I don't know. Or they'll give me an answer that really doesn't have to do with that. And it's just like, oh, because you can just take it. And the obvious thing is just not so obvious to them. So it's tough to spot those things. But okay,
Yeah.
where would I move? If I did 95, you did knight h5, then what would you think I would do after that?
My thought would be that you'd go to either back where you came from to f3. That would make sense to me. Or to d3 and kind of block the file from the rook. The problem that I saw with those two moves is that if I take your other knight with my bishop on that long diagonal, there's a little bit of a damaging to that pawn structure on that side.
Yeah.
But that also opens lines for you. So it goes both ways.
Yeah. Well, I do like, okay, so I'm trying to think through that. I think that's a good thought process, but if you do take that knight, let's say I'll work backwards. I do lose my pawn structure, but you've lost your best bishop. So in the end, I'm going to have.
Did we lose you?
You're not going to be able to go against that knight or that weakened pawn very well, at least in the near future. And I can even give up that pawn if I need to because I'm already up a pawn. Plus, your knight's going to be a little off sides, what we call it. It's on the rim there, and you can't bring it back so easily without losing some time. And your queen side's still undeveloped, and I'll have the center and an extra pawn. So I'm not too worried about that. But the other option is I might not move my knight once I take e5. If you move your knight to h5, I could just protect it with f4. And then if you take it, I'll take, you'll lose your bishop again, and I won't wreck my pawn structure. And even if I lose that pawn back, I'll have gotten your bishop out or gotten rid of your good bishop without losing my good bishop. So I wasn't too worried. I mean, I guess you could go knight g3. I move the rook over. You could take my bishop, fine. But you've used a lot of moves, 1, 2, 3, 4 moves with your knight to take one of my pieces, which is undeveloped, and I'm getting more central control. So that's what my thought process is if you do knight h5. I'm not sure if that would be the best line. What I would think, or what I would do if I did knight takes e5, I think you can just go rook to e8. And then the threat is, obviously taking
Oh,
the knight. So if I move the knight, then
everything
you
on
can
that
take the
pile.
pawn on e4, and we've just done a massive trade, but you've actually opened up your bishop, and I'm not developed so much on my queen side. So then I think the position is virtually dead even. And if I try to protect my knight with something like f4, then let's see, what are some moves here? I mean, there are a lot of tactics with these lines. That's why I'm always hesitant to take the pawn in the center. I think you can even do things like knight takes e4. I take with my knight. You can't take with a bishop yet. I'll just trade and keep, or you could even. Yeah, you could take with a bishop on e5. Then I take f takes e5, rook takes e5, and I've got two pieces pinned to my king. So I'm going to lose one of them. You're going to get your piece back. We're going to have traded a lot of things. My king's still stuck in the center. Again, it's going to be pretty dead even if I take that pawn. Because you say you're not ready for an open game. I'm not quite ready either to open it up too much. So that's why I just did bishop c4, because I know that's the strongest place for it. And if I ever take e5 now, then I'm threatening f7 and some other things like that. And you probably want to go bishop e6 at some point anyway. And, I'll double your pawns there. So bishop c4 seems just like a pretty strong move. I can castle after this. I thought of bishop d3, but bishop d3 didn't seem as attacking. So anyway, and it does pose you some problems. So
Yeah.
okay, let's go forward. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the bishop c4, and then I played knight b to d7, and then we had long castles, kind of pinning that knight to the rook.
Yeah, this I think was the start of the beginning to the end here.
Yeah.
you have to keep. I know. So you want to protect that pawn on e5, and I don't know. I think there are a couple ways to do it. If you let my king castle to safety, especially on the queen side, and you're pinning your own pieces, I think it's dangerous. So I would say, what were some other thoughts that you had here?
My biggest thought here was guarding the pawn on e5, definitely. The problem with knight to b to d7 is it doesn't guard the pawn at all.
It does,
because it does for the moment, but once knight takes e5, knight takes e5, rook takes d8, and
yeah, but you have a move between now and then, so it's okay. Knight b d7 is not great for that, but it is protecting the pawn for now. Yeah,
I guess I could have played
other
rook
ways?
to e8 in this position.
I think, yeah, rook e8. I also think that moving the knight on f6 could potentially, like knight f6, you could go to e8 and maybe jump into d6 to attack my bishop. You could go just to h5 right now to jump into f4. If I attack you with something like g4, I don't think that's great. It's not what I would want. And if you get to f4, you can always move it back to e6, and I can't double your pawns. So I would be inclined either knight h5 or knight c6 kind of a move. Or just, let's see. Yeah, because now if I take knight e5, I am threatening bishop f7.
One thing I should have probably done is instead of playing knight to d7, is play knight c6, and that way that it wouldn't have been pinned to the rook if you long castle.
Right. I'm only thinking, so if you do knight c6, for me, my trumps here are the d5 square, which is very strong for me, but your trump is the d4 square, which I have protected by a lot. We've both protected those, but it'd be nice for your position if you could get c6 in there, so I could never put something on d5, and in the meantime get the knights out too. So I'm wondering if rook e8 first, although then I can castle, but that's okay. You can always protect the f7 pawn in other ways. That's the danger here. Is I can also go knight g5 at some
and just
point.
real quick, what the purpose of in this position? Why is protecting that pawn important?
Which pawn? The pawn on e5?
The one on e5. Yeah.
Well, I can just take
that
it
seems
for
to be
free.
the stickler.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
so
if I take that pawn, yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, so you take that pawn, and now you both have the center on that area, and he lost material.
Yeah, I would get a free pawn, and I'm attacking his f7 pawn, which is next to his king. Like I could potentially get 2 pawns and a check. I mean, once you start losing material like that, I know it's only 2 pawns, and in a game with beginners, the evaluation fluctuates rapidly because people are hanging pieces every other move. It's like, oh, you can take my rook. Oh, you didn't take your rook, but you lost your knight. Oh, but I didn't take your knight, but now I'm hanging my bishop, and it goes like that.
Right.
But at this level, 1 pawn could be the whole game, 1 pawn difference. So, he has to somehow try to protect that pawn. So,
Gotcha.
I don't know exactly how. I think knight c6 or knight h5 or knight e8 or rook e8, something like that, because after knight bd7, the evaluation changes pretty dramatically. And I think it's almost plus. I'm going to the lines of the computer. It's almost +2, so I'm almost 2 points ahead. Whereas before, let's see, I was about with best play. Yeah, knight c6 is what. It's not even a half a pawn difference. It's almost the same as an opening advantage for me. And so knight c6 is the top engine move. I lied. We looked at the engine. So yeah, but the other options were knight e8. They also recommend, and even bishop e6 just to trade that off. And if I go for yours, you kind of protect it, and you have 2 pawns in the center protecting all those squares. You can manage it. It's still a little bit worse, about almost a pawn worse. But once you do knight bd7, it's almost 2 pawns worse. So that was a huge swing in the position.
And even though I doubled the pawns, that pawn that's now on e6 now controls d5, which was the square that you had a lot of pieces on.
Yeah, I've seen some openings like that where a person will have double pawns, but it's very hard. The pawns are protected, and it's hard to get at them, and the pawns are protecting key squares for all the opponent's pieces. So it's not always the end of the world to have double pawns, especially with all these long range pieces. So anyway,
one move I kind of like here. Sorry, I'm just looking at the double pawns. One move I kind of like here is king f7. So I'm adding protection to that e6 pawn, and maybe even dropping the bishop back to f8 and going on a different diagonal there. Anyway, that's just an idea.
Yeah, because if I go knight g5, if you do king f7, you can always move to e7. I can't really attack you too much. You have a knight there. I mean, you could get a b6 in at some point just to protect that c5 square. And I think at this level, we're always looking at key squares. What are the powerful squares? What are the access points into the other position? But that assumes that you've already gone through the levels of, okay, I can see the tactics of, if I take this piece, you take it back, and I take it back, I gain a free piece. So yeah, this is a little bit higher analysis, but that could work. So let's see. I wonder if we could go through the rest. It's not that much longer. Let's see if it swings again. So castle long. So I did queenside castle, and now your king is pinned. So I think now you had to just protect it with the rook. So your rook is unpinned, and you're still protecting that pawn. And or maybe just rook f8. Just go back. Maybe you didn't want to go back to rook f8 because I'm going to go knight g5 and attack the f7 pawn. But you've got to somehow defend all your weak points. I'm going to get a knight d5 potentially at some point. But let's see. You did
king h8 was just a really slow move.
Yeah, that was like, if knight bd7 was a bad move, it's showing the evaluation as king h8 basically a losing move. You're down now. It shows 6.5 points, which is, at this level, basically a lost game. So a lot of people at home playing, they say, oh, wait, this looks pretty even. You count all the pieces, it seems pretty much the same, but it's just, positionally, you can't hold everything together. Things are just going to start falling apart. So
Yeah, and as I watched the game, that's kind of what I saw both in Steven's eyes and on the board. Steven's like, "Uh-oh."
Yeah, so let's see what
I think
happens.
I said, "You're just protecting now, or you're just defending now." He's like, "If that."
Yeah, if that, right? So I do knight e5, and yeah, I don't even know if you don't take what happens. I think it's even worse. Yeah,
Yeah, that
because
was
I'm
my
going to
thought
take
process at this point too.
because I'm threatening just to take f7 with a check, and that's what's called a fork. I'm attacking the king and the rook, and then your only move. The knight checks are so powerful. Your only move is king to g8. Then I take your rook with what's called a discover check. So I'm taking it and I'm checking you with that piece that was the bishop. So you can't even deal with that. You've got to move your king again. So you're going to be losing 6 points of material here with nothing to show for it. So I guess you're trying to cut your losses. You took the knight back, and then I get a rook. But yeah, now this is dangerous. I think you have to just do knight to g8. Although
and just huddle.
But I guess bishop back. Yeah, the thing is you're attacking my bishop, which I didn't see for a second. So once you moved king g7, you are attacking 2 pieces. So I just kind of said, okay, I'll consolidate down to being a piece up instead of being, up in exchange or something like that. So you did bishop f8. I think that's the same. I wonder what it says for like knight g8. Okay, knight g8 is the best.
I think also if I play knight g8, you can just move the bishop back, so it's not free anymore.
Right. Exactly. But then you have a little bit of a chance to move something else out, like the bishop to f6 to attack. Because once I attack your knight on e5, if I do like an f4, you move it, then I take your pawn on f7, and I'm attacking your knight on g8, and it's pinned. So you've got to use that gained tempo, which is basically a move, to get something out. So, or attack something. So maybe bishop f6, I move my rook somewhere, and then you can move your king out to unpin the knight. But yeah, otherwise, but you're already down, I think, 7-8 points here. So what'd you do? Bishop f8. So then I just take it, and then king g7, only move. And then I wonder what's the best move if it just says to take. It just says rook d8 is the best. Wow. What happens if you take that? Then I pin. Okay. Interesting. I guess I could have done that. It's a fast game. I want to simplify things, and I know I can calculate. So I just took the bishop, rook takes c8, and then move my bishop back. And now we've consolidated. I've got 4-3 pawns on the king side. I've got 2 bishops. I've got an extra piece. So yeah, it was kind of at this point a moot point at this level. So. But yeah,
played a few more moves.
Let's see how far did you get.
We got to a point once you got your rook on that 7th rank.
Yeah, you fell for another fork. So now I was up not just a piece, I was up a rook, and then your king was really trapped. Got the rook to the 7th rank. So I'm just going to gobble up all your pawns. And I can even trade my rook for your knight, or one of my pieces for the knight, and just steamroll with all my pawns, get an extra queen. So,
at this point, I kind of just lost the idea of maybe I could sneak a pawn by. So
yeah, but that's not gonna happen. Exactly. I have an extra one, so and the king and the bishop can come in, so it just is impossible. I think when you resigned, it's showing plus 15, so it's it's not going to be salvageable.
So Stephen, what's your takeaway? Where did this kind of at what point did it really fall apart for you? Was it when the queens were swapped, or when the rook came down to what is that, 8?
D8, rook to D8. I think really where it fell apart is where I played the knight b to d7 move, and I blocked my bishop and set up that pin. And from there, it was just one. And then the king to the side was just slow and didn't deal with enough of the problem soon enough. So here I would probably just want to play more aggressively, play that like the best move is knight c6, but even c6, like you were saying, or play b6, trying to get my bishop on the other long diagonal. Some idea like that would have been probably a better go-to there.
Yeah, I think so. Just a little more activity in the center, not self-pinning. But it's hard to see that self-pinning move. Your rook is keeping my king at least in the center. And if I castle to the king side, I'm not as inclined to pawn storm with my pawns, because then I open myself up too. But if I castle to the queen side, you don't have anything developed there, and I do have some stuff developed on the king side. So I'm going to be at an advantage if either of us decides to do a pawn storm. I'll be like 2 or 3 moves ahead of you, and that is often what all it takes when you have these tactical things, pawn storms.
Yeah, so, exactly.
Yeah. Well, good. I mean, this was pretty cool.
Cool.
Should we go over the next game?
You are listening to And If Love Remains.
First of 24 installments requested by Dr. Leavitt. Trying to be compliance here because we're taking him and that whole organization down.